Jacob Mallister stood on the edge of ruin, squinting into a sun that felt like it was trying to cook the very hope out of him. The newspaper clipping in his hand was getting flimsy from sweat and desperation. Ranch cook wanted. Large crew, remote location, decent wages. It was a lie, of course. The wages weren't decent because the ranch was bleeding money. The crew wasn't large anymore, because good men don't stick around to eat burned beans and their own resentment. Another week of his cooking, and the last of them would be gone. The Triple M ranch, 10 years of his blood and bone, would be nothing but a ghost on the prairie. He heard the stagecoach before he saw it, a rumble of thunder on a clear day. This was it. His last chance. He was expecting some grizzled old cowpoke with a sour face and hands permanently stained with bacon grease. A man who wouldn't ask questions. Instead, the dust settled to reveal a woman. She stepped out of the coach like she was stepping into a church, her faded blue dress clean but worn thin with time and trouble. Her auburn hair was pinned back, neat and proper, a defiance against the grit of the road. But it wasn't her that stopped Jacob's heart in his chest. It was the 3 small faces peering out from behind her worn skirts. A boy, no older than 8, trying to stand like a man. A little girl, maybe 6, with eyes that took in everything. And the smallest one, a girl of 4, clinging to her mother's dress like a burr. Her face a perfect, silent mask. "Mr. Mallister?" the woman asked, her voice steady, but Jacob could see the exhaustion etched around her green eyes. "I'm Martha Sullivan. I'm here about the cook position." Jacob's mouth opened, but no words came out. He just stared. A cook? He needed a cook, not a widow with a small army of children. "Ma'am," he finally managed, gesturing helplessly at the kids. "I think there's been a mistake." Martha's chin lifted. A flicker of pride, or maybe just pure grit. "I can cook for 50 men, Mr. Mallister. I fed a logging crew for 2 years. These are my children. Tommy, Lucy, and Sarah. We come as a package." This was impossible. A madhouse. His men were rough, their language coarser than sand. A remote ranch was no place for children. And the gossip, a young widow living under his roof, it would set the whole county talking. But then he looked closer. He saw the patches on her dress, the way the children's clothes were just a little too small. And he saw the dark circles under Martha's eyes. They weren't just from the journey. They were from months, maybe years, of worry. And the little one. Sarah. She hadn't made a sound. When a gust of wind kicked up dust, she just pressed her face into her mother's leg, silent and still. Something was wrong with that child. Deeply wrong. "Ma'am, this is the Triple M," he said, his voice softer than he intended. 20 miles to the nearest anything. Just me and 8 hands. No other women. It's a hard life. "Lonely doesn't scare us," Martha said, her voice unwavering. "We've got each other." She pulled a letter from her bag. "A reference. It says I work hard and I don't cause trouble." The boy, Tommy, stepped forward, his small shoulders squared. "My ma's the best cook there is, mister, and I can help. I'm good with horses." Little Lucy peeked out. "I can gather eggs," she whispered. Jacob felt something twist inside him. The sound of children's voices. It had been so long. But this was a business, not a charity. He had a ranch to save. He couldn't take on a widow and 3 orphans. Martha must have seen the refusal hardening in his eyes. "Just 1 week," she said, her voice dropping, losing its sharp edge. "1 week to prove ourselves. If it doesn't work, we'll leave. No trouble." "And where will you go?" he asked, the question tasting like ash in his mouth. He already knew the answer. Martha's composure finally cracked, just for a second. "We'll manage." The stage driver set down their belongings, 2 small bags and a single wooden crate. Everything they owned in the world. Martha paid him with the last of her coins. She'd gambled everything just to get here. Jacob looked at the children again. Tommy, trying so hard to be the man of the family. Lucy, curious but cautious. And Sarah. Sarah just stared at him with those big, dark, silent eyes. It felt like she was looking right through his skin, into the hollowed-out place where his own family used to be. Against every shred of common sense, against every instinct for self-preservation, he heard himself speak. 1 week. You cook for the crew. We'll see how it goes. Relief washed over Martha's face, so profound it was like watching a drowning person take their first breath of air. You won't regret this, she said. But as Jacob loaded their meager life into his wagon, he was already regretting it. This wasn't just a mistake, it felt like destiny. And destiny, in his experience, was just another word for disaster. The ride to the Triple M was a long, dusty silence. When the ranch finally came into view, a collection of sturdy buildings he'd built with his own 2 hands, he felt a familiar surge of pride. It's beautiful, Martha said softly beside him. He glanced at her, surprised. Most people just saw the loneliness. She saw a home. His men gathered as they pulled up, their faces a mixture of confusion and suspicion. Boys, Jacob called out, his voice rough. This is Mrs. Sullivan, our new cook, and her children. The silence that followed was heavy enough to bend steel. Jacob could feel their unspoken questions. What has the boss done now? But as Martha climbed down, her dignity a shield against their stares, and little Lucy gave a shy wave, Jacob knew there was no going back. For better or worse, the Sullivans were here. He'd given them 1 week. The only question was whether the ranch, or any of them, would survive it. The kitchen was still dark when Martha Sullivan entered, the first gray light of dawn barely a promise on the horizon. This was her battlefield. She'd spent the night staring into the darkness, not sleeping, just planning. 8 hungry, skeptical cowboys were a tougher enemy than any she'd faced before. The stove was a monster, a huge wood-burning beast that could feed an army. She rolled up her sleeves. This was more than a job. It was a fight for survival. By the time the sun was up, the smell of fresh biscuits, thick-cut bacon, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead was rolling across the ranch yard. The stomp of boots on the porch was followed by low, grumbling voices. Tommy appeared in the doorway, his hair a mess. Ma, can I help? Set the table, son, she said, not looking up from the mountain of eggs she was scrambling. Use the good plates. Lucy came next, with Sarah perched on her hip. The little girl's eyes darted around the kitchen, taking everything in, but her mouth remained a firm, silent line. Martha's heart ached. Before her husband's death, Sarah had been a chatterbox. Now, 6 months later, silence was her only language. The dining room went quiet as a tomb when Martha carried in the first platters. 8 weathered faces turned to her. Jacob sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. These men weren't going to make it easy. Morning, boys, Martha said, her voice calm and even. Hope you're hungry. The foreman, a man with silver hair and a permanent squint named Bill Henderson, picked up a biscuit like it might be poisoned. He took a cautious bite. His eyebrows shot up. Well, I'll be, he muttered, then caught himself. Beg pardon, ma'am. That broke the spell. The men fell on the food like wolves. Martha knew how to judge her cooking, not by compliments, but by the speed of disappearance. In minutes, the platters were scraped clean. As the men filed out to start their day, she heard Bill tell Jacob, Boss, if she keeps cooking like that, I don't care if she brought a whole circus with her. For the first time since stepping off that stage, Martha let her shoulders relax. Just a fraction. Maybe, just maybe, this would work. In the days that followed, the ranch found a new rhythm. A rhythm set by the clang of pots and the smell of roasting beef. The Triple M started to feel less like a camp and more like a home. The children slowly carved out their own spaces. Tommy shadowed Jacob, his endless questions a sign of a boy desperate for a father figure. Jacob, for his part, tried to stay gruff, but Martha saw him patiently showing Tommy how to properly oil a saddle. Lucy became the ranch mascot, charming the cowboys with her gap-toothed smile and talking to the chickens as if they were her personal confidants. But Sarah remained a ghost. She was always there, in a doorway, on the porch steps, watching. Her silence was a constant, unnerving presence. It worried Martha deeply. She didn't know how to reach her daughter, how to pull her back from the silent world she'd retreated into. Jacob Mallister was another puzzle. He was a hard man. A man who had built this ranch from nothing after losing his own wife and child. He'd buried his grief under years of relentless work. But Martha saw the cracks in his armor. The way his face softened when Lucy brought him a shiny rock. The way he always made sure the woodbox by the kitchen stove was full, without ever being asked. One evening, she heard voices from the porch. Jacob was whittling, and Tommy was chattering away beside him. "Pa used to say he'd take me bird watching," Tommy said, his voice trailing off into the sadness of a memory. Martha held her breath. This was dangerous ground. "Your pa sounds like he was a good man," Jacob said quietly, not looking up from his carving. "He was going to teach me how to track deer," Tommy added. "Ma says he was the best tracker in 3 counties. "Well," Jacob said, the knife still moving smoothly over the wood, "I suppose someone ought to teach you those things. Can't have a cowboy who doesn't know how to read tracks." Tommy's face lit up. "You'd teach me? Really?" "Reckon I could spare some time on Sundays," Jacob grunted. "If your ma doesn't mind." Martha smiled to herself. Jacob Mallister was a good man, trying his best to pretend he wasn't. But their fragile peace was about to be shattered. The next morning, a fancy buggy rolled into the yard. A man in a suit and bowler hat stepped out, looking as out of place as a cat in a dog kennel. Jacob went out to meet him, his posture stiffening. Martha couldn't hear the words, but the man's tone was sharp, disapproving. He kept gesturing towards the house, towards her and the children. When he finally left, Jacob stood in the yard for a long time, staring after him. Later, Martha found him attacking a broken fence post with a hammer, each blow a release of frustration. "Everything all right?" she asked. Jacob stopped hammering. That was Reverend Matthews from town. His jaw was tight. "Seems word has gotten around about our arrangement." Martha's stomach went cold. "What kind of word?" "The kind that questions whether it's proper for a widow and her children to be living on a bachelor's ranch," Jacob bit out. "The kind that suggests you should find work somewhere more appropriate." "I see," Martha said, her voice a thin thread. They were going to be cast out again. She could see the doubt in Jacob's eyes. He was a practical man. He was weighing the cost of keeping them against the cost of the town's disapproval. She'd seen that look before. That evening, she tucked the children in, her heart a heavy stone in her chest. She would have to start planning where they would go next. As she was banking the fire in the stove, a tiny voice sliced through the quiet. "Mama." Martha spun around. Sarah was standing in the doorway in her nightgown, clutching her rag doll. "What is it, sweetheart?" Martha knelt, her heart pounding. Sarah's voice was a rusty whisper. "Are we going to leave again?" The words broke Martha's heart. The first words her daughter had spoken in 6 months, and they were filled with the fear that haunted all of them. The fear of having no home. "I don't know, baby," Martha said, her own voice thick with unshed tears. "But whatever happens, we'll be together." As she carried Sarah back to bed, she saw a tall figure in the shadows of the hallway. Jacob. He had heard everything. Their eyes met across the dark, silent house. And in that moment, Martha saw something in his expression change. The question was, had it changed enough? Jacob couldn't get the little girl's voice out of his head. "Are we going to leave again?" It was a child's question, but it carried the weight of the world. He'd spent the night wrestling with ghosts he thought he'd buried 7 years ago with his wife and son. The next morning, he found Sarah on the back porch steps, a small, lonely figure in the vastness of the ranch. He'd never been good with children. Not for a long time. But he sat down beside her. "Mind if I sit?" She just scooted over, making room. They sat in silence, watching the chickens scratch in the dirt. "You know," Jacob said after a while, his voice gentle, "those chickens need feeding. Think you could help me?" Sarah looked up at him, her dark eyes considering his offer. Then she gave a slow, deliberate nod. He showed her how to scatter the corn. The hens came clucking and flapping, and a tiny, fragile smile touched Sarah's lips. It was the first one he'd ever seen. "There you go," Jacob said softly. "They like you." "They're soft," Sarah whispered, reaching out a tentative hand to stroke a brown hen. The two words hit Jacob with the force of a physical blow. She was finding her voice again. Here. On his ranch. And he'd be damned if he let some gossiping preacher take that away from her. Over the next few days, a change came over the house. Sarah became Jacob's tiny shadow. She followed him on his chores, a silent companion who was slowly, carefully, coming back to life. "She told me the chickens know her name now," Martha told him one evening as they watched the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "She's a special little girl," Jacob replied, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "You're good with her," Martha said, studying his face in the golden light. "With all of them." Jacob felt the old walls around his heart start to crumble. "They're good kids. You've raised them well." "Even after losing their father," Martha said quietly, "they still have room in their hearts for someone new." Their eyes met, and in that shared glance, an understanding passed between them. An understanding that this was about more than just a job or a place to live. But the moment was shattered by Tommy, who came racing around the corner of the house. "Mr. Jacob, quick! One of the mares is down." They hurried to the barn, the unspoken thing between them lingering in the air. As he worked to save the horse, Jacob realized that somewhere along the line, the Triple M had stopped being just his ranch. It had started to feel like their home. Their peace, however, was a fragile thing. A week later, another fancy carriage arrived. This one belonged to Harlan Boone, the banker from the next town over. He was a man who smiled with his mouth but not his eyes. His presence felt like a cold wind on a hot day. "Mallister," Boone said, skipping the pleasantries. "We need to talk about your loan." Jacob's blood ran cold. 2 years ago, during the Great Drought, he'd mortgaged the ranch to help his neighbors survive. He'd saved them, but it had put a noose around his own neck. The payments were current, but just barely. "What about it?" Jacob asked, his voice tight. "The bank's calling it in," Boone said, his smile as sharp as broken glass. "Full payment, $40,000. You have 30 days. Martha had come out onto the porch. Jacob saw her face drain of color. $40,000. It was an impossible, astronomical sum. "This ranch is worth twice that," Jacob protested. "Not in this market," Boone sneered. "Besides, there are concerns. A single woman, children, no proper marriage. It's an unstable environment. The bank doesn't like instability." After Boone drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and dread behind him, Jacob slumped onto the porch steps, his head in his hands. He felt a small hand on his arm. It was Sarah. She was patting his arm, trying to comfort him. "It's him, Papa," she said, her voice clear and certain. "The mean man made you sad." Jacob's head shot up. Papa. She had called him Papa. The word struck him like a bolt of lightning, illuminating a truth he'd been trying to deny. These weren't just people living in his house. This was his family. Martha sat down on his other side. "We'll figure this out, Jacob. Together." "There's no we in this, Martha," he said, the words tasting like failure. "I won't let you suffer for my mistakes." "Too late for that," she said, her voice firm. "We're a family now. Sarah just proved it. We're in this together, whether you like it or not." Jacob looked at the little girl who had just claimed him as her own. He looked at her mother, whose strength was the glue holding them all together. "What are we going to do?" he asked, the weight of the world on his shoulders. "We're going to fight," Martha said simply. "This is our home, and no one is taking it from us." As if on cue, Tommy and Lucy came running from the barn, their laughter echoing in the sudden quiet. They stopped when they saw the grim faces of the adults. "What's wrong?" Tommy asked, the worry returning to his young eyes. Jacob opened his arms, pulling all 3 children into a hug. "We have some problems," he said, his voice thick with a fierce, newfound resolve. "But we're going to solve them. Together." as a family. The word hung in the evening air, a promise and a prayer. He had a family to fight for, but he had no idea that the fight wasn't just for a ranch. It was for their very lives. That night, sleep was a stranger to Jacob. Sarah's word, Papa, echoed in the darkness. He had already lost one family. He couldn't lose another. He found himself standing in the doorway of the children's room, watching the steady rise and fall of their chests. They were safe here. For now. Martha appeared beside him, a shadow in the moonlight. "They feel like they belong here," she whispered. "For the first time since their father." "I made a mess of things," Jacob said, his voice raw. "I never should have taken that loan." "Why did you, Jacob?" Martha asked, her voice free of judgment. He was quiet for a long moment, the memories still sharp. "Drought hit hard 3 summers ago. My neighbors, the Hendersons, the Martinezes, they were losing everything. Their wells were dry, their cattle starving. I had water. I had grass. I could have watched them fail. Or I could help. So, you mortgaged this place. You risked everything to save them. And now I might lose it all because of it," he said bitterly. "No," Martha said, her hand finding his in the dark. "You might lose it because a greedy man wants to take it. There's a difference." The next morning, the mood at the breakfast table was somber. Then Martha stood up. "I want to talk to you all." Tommy looked up from his plate. "What about, Ma?" Martha took a deep breath. "Mr. Jacob is in some trouble. The bank wants a lot of money, more than we have. They want to take the ranch." "Are we going to have to leave?" Lucy asked, her voice trembling. Jacob started to speak to reassure them, but Martha held up a hand. "We're not leaving. We're going to fight for our home. All of us." She reached into her apron and pulled out a small leather pouch. "This was the insurance money from your father. It's not much, about $300. But it belongs to this family." "Ma, that's for you," Tommy protested. "Your father meant for it to protect his family," Martha corrected gently. "And this is our family now." Jacob was stunned. "Martha, I can't take that. It's all you have." "Jacob Mallister," she said, her green eyes flashing. "When I stepped off that stage, I was at the end of my rope. You gave us a home. You've been a father to my children. This ranch isn't just your property anymore. It's our home. And families protect their home." Sarah slid down from her chair and walked over to Jacob, wrapping her small arms around his leg. "Papa, don't be sad. We'll help." The simple faith in her voice was almost more than he could bear. A 4-year-old who had already lost one father was ready to go to war for another. "I've got an idea," Tommy said, his voice full of newfound importance. "We could sell some of the best cattle directly to the other ranchers, not at market prices, for top dollar." Jacob stared at the boy. It was a brilliant idea. A way to get cash quickly without waiting for the seasonal cattle drives. "That's good thinking, son," Jacob said, and Tommy puffed out his chest. Lucy raised her hand. "I can sell eggs in town, and your pies, Mama. Mrs. Henderson says they're the best in the whole state." In that moment, watching this family rally, Jacob felt a surge of hope so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. The next few weeks were a blur of frantic activity. Jacob and Tommy rode from ranch to ranch selling their prime breeding stock. Martha and the girls turned the kitchen into a commercial enterprise, selling pies, bread, and eggs in town. Even Sarah did her part, carefully gathering eggs and feeding the chickens with a seriousness that belied her age. But as the deadline loomed, a harsh reality set in. They had worked miracles, but it wasn't enough. They had raised almost half the money, but they were still $20,000 short. Time was running out. The solution came from a ghost. Martha was sorting through her late husband's papers, a painful task she'd put off for months. In the bottom of a dusty trunk, she found something she'd completely forgotten about. A deed and a set of mineral rights papers for a small plot of land he'd owned back in Colorado. "Jacob!" she called out, her voice trembling with a wild, desperate hope. "I think I found it." I think I found our answer. When he looked at the papers, Jacob's eyes went wide. They were geological surveys, maps of a claim her husband had been working. Martha, he breathed, if this survey is accurate, this could be worth a fortune. Are you sure? I'm not. But it's a chance. Our only chance. But as he spoke, they heard the sound of riders approaching. Fast. Through the window, Jacob saw Sheriff Morrison. And beside him, grinning like a predator, was Harlan Boone. Time's up, Mallister. Boone's voice echoed across the yard. Unless you've got $40,000 in that house, you've got until sunset to get out. Jacob felt Martha's hand find his. They were so close. But it looked like their time had just run out. The sun rose on what was supposed to be the last day of the Triple M Ranch. The air was cold. The sky a dull, unforgiving gray. Sheriff Morrison sat on his horse, his face a grim mask of reluctance. Harlan Boone, however, strutted around the yard as if he were measuring for new curtains. Two of his hired thugs waited by a wagon, ready to haul away Jacob's life. "Well, Mallister," Boone called out. "Judgment Day. Got my money?" Jacob stepped onto the porch. Martha was right beside him, her back as straight as a rifle barrel. The children clustered behind them, a small, frightened huddle. "We're working on it," Jacob said, his voice dangerously calm. "Martha owns mineral rights in Colorado. They should more than cover the debt." Boone let out a harsh barking laugh. "Should? Might? Maybe? I don't deal in maybes, Mallister. I deal in cash." "The papers are legal." Martha stepped forward, her voice ringing with a strength that surprised them all. "My husband owned a mining claim. It's valuable." "Even if that's true, little lady," Boone sneered, "it takes weeks, months, to verify a claim and sell it. The bank wants its money today. You've got until sunset." Just as the words left his mouth, a rider came galloping into the yard. It was Bill Henderson, his horse lathered in sweat. And behind him were more riders, the Hendersons, the Martinezes, Pete Morrison, the very neighbors Jacob had nearly bankrupted himself to save. "Hold on there, Boone," Bill said, swinging down from his horse. "These folks aren't going anywhere." "This is none of your business, Henderson," Boone snapped. "The hell it isn't," Pete Morrison growled, walking forward. His face was a roadmap of hard years. "Jacob Mallister saved my ranch. He saved all of our ranches. We don't forget debts around here." More families arrived, on horseback and in wagons. They formed a silent, determined circle around Boone and his men. "What is this?" Boone demanded, a flicker of uncertainty in his cold eyes. "It's called loyalty," Bill said. "Something a snake like you wouldn't understand." One by one, the neighbors came forward. They didn't have much, but they gave what they could. $500 from one family, $800 from another, a deed to a prize bull, a promise of the fall harvest profits. Martha felt tears streaming down her face. It was a flood of decency against a wall of greed. But it wasn't enough. When it was all counted, they were still $10,000 short. Boone was beaming, his confidence restored. "Touching," he sneered. "A regular charity ball. But you're short, and I have the law on my side." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Now, Boone, maybe we can work out a deal." "No deals," Boone cut him off. "Payment in full, or the ranch is mine. Period." That's when Martha stepped forward again. Her chin was high, her eyes blazing. Jacob tried to stop her, but she put a hand on his arm. "Then take it," she said. The yard fell silent. "You want this ranch, Mr. Boone? Fine. But you're not just taking land and buildings." Her voice rose, carrying across the silent crowd, clear and powerful. "You're taking the home where 3 children who lost their father learned to feel safe again. You're stealing the place where a broken man who lost his family learned how to love again. You are destroying a family, Mr. Boone, and everyone here will be your witness." Sarah, who had been hiding behind Lucy, suddenly broke free. She ran to Jacob and threw her arms around his legs, her small body trembling. "Don't let the mean man take Papa away," she cried out. "Papa!" The word struck Jacob with the force of a physical blow. This little girl, who had been silenced by trauma, was speaking for him. For them. A fierce, protective rage roared to life inside him, burning away all the fear and doubt. "You know what, Boone?" Jacob said, his voice as steady and hard as granite as he knelt and gathered his children into his arms. "You can have the ranch, but you can't have my family." Then he looked up at Martha, his heart bare for all to see. "Martha Sullivan, I should have said this weeks ago. Will you marry me? Not because of the bank, not because of the gossip, but because I love you. Because I love these children more than my own life. Because you are all the home I will ever need." Martha's breath hitched. Around them the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. "Jacob Mallister," she said, her voice thick with tears of love and relief. "I thought you'd never ask." A wild cheer went up from their neighbors, but Boone was furious. "This changes nothing. It's a touching sentiment, but sentiment doesn't pay your debts." "Actually," a new voice cut through the noise, "they can." Everyone turned. A well-dressed stranger was riding into the yard holding an official-looking document. "James Crawford, Rocky Mountain Mining Company," he announced. He looked at Martha. "Mrs. Sullivan, your husband's mineral claims, they didn't just pan out. He struck the mother lode, a major silver vein." He held up the document. "We're prepared to offer $50,000 for the rights. Cash. Today." Martha felt her knees buckle. Jacob caught her, his own face a mask of stunned disbelief. "50,000," she whispered. Boone's face had gone a sickly shade of purple. He was beaten. The crowd erupted. "Looks like you get your money after all, Boone," Jacob said with grim satisfaction. The banker and his thugs stormed off in defeat. Jacob pulled Martha close, right there in front of God and the entire county. "So, is that a yes to my proposal?" Martha laughed through her tears, a sound of pure joy. "Jacob Mallister, just try and stop me." 3 weeks later, Martha stood before the mirror, smoothing the front of her blue dress. It was the same dress she'd arrived in, but today it looked different. Mended, clean, and worn for a celebration, not a last stand. Today was her wedding day. "Ma, you look beautiful," Lucy said from the doorway. All 3 children were in their finest. Tommy wore a new shirt, his hair slicked down. Sarah held a bouquet of wildflowers, her face alight with a joy that had been absent for so long. "Are you ready to become Mrs. Mallister?" Tommy asked, trying to sound formal but failing to hide his grin. "I've been ready for weeks," Martha laughed. "The question is, are you ready to officially have Jacob as your father?" "Papa said we get to sign papers," Sarah said eagerly. "That say we belong to him forever. Forever." The word was the most beautiful she had ever heard. The ceremony was under the big oak tree in the ranch yard. Reverend Matthews, who had once come to condemn them, now stood beaming as he joined them in matrimony. When he asked who gave this woman in marriage, Tommy's voice rang out, clear and strong. "Her children do, and we're proud to give her to the best man we know." After the kiss that sealed their new life, Jacob knelt down. He pulled out the adoption papers Doc Bailey had drawn up. "Tommy, Lucy, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I would be the proudest man in the world if you would officially become my children." Sarah was the first to grab the pen, her small hand carefully making its mark. "Now we're really a family, Papa," she said. The celebration lasted long into the night. Martha watched from the porch as Jacob taught Tommy how to play horseshoes, as Lucy and the other children chased fireflies in the twilight. Sarah sat beside her, her head resting on Martha's lap. "Mama," she asked thoughtfully, "do you think Daddy in heaven is happy that we found Papa Jacob?" Martha pulled her daughter close, her heart full to bursting. "I think your daddy is very happy that we're safe, and that we're loved." Jacob came and sat beside her, slipping an arm around her waist as the first stars appeared. "Any regrets, Mrs. Mallister?" She looked at her husband, then at their children, their laughter mingling with the sound of the crickets. She had come here looking for a job, a wage, a roof over their heads. She had found a home, a father for her children, and a love she thought she would never know again. Not a single one, Mr. Mallister, she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Not a single one. It was the story of how a simple ad for a cook brought not just a family together, but brought a community together to stand against greed. It was the story of a little girl who had lost her voice to tragedy and found it again just in time to save the people she loved. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of justice, hope, and the unbreakable bonds of family.